I've been covering this for
Yeah, we kind of
several weeks. Well, no, but what's new, and this is a big update, is that now you have mainstream media outlets like the New York Times also saying, which I said a couple of weeks ago, there were reports, these were not mainstream media, but reports saying that IDF soldiers were raising the alarm that Hamas was planning something. There was many of the guns, etc., that Hamas had came from IDF bases, meaning someone was helping them get them.
Well, I mean, this is the most surveilled place on the
Yeah,
planet.
yeah.
You can't take a piss without Israel knowing about it, and yet somehow they managed. It's like that just never felt right to me. Particularly when you look at the WikiLeaks cables from 2007 and 2008 that showed that Israel wanted Hamas to grow because it would allow them to treat Palestine as a, quote unquote, worthy adversary, as opposed to just pummeling somebody while they're down. Of course, Hamas is still not a quote unquote worthy adversary because they have nowhere near the amount of firepower or even human power that the Israeli army does. But yeah, it just never felt right to me that, like, oh, Israel can tell you if which Palestinian took a shit today, but it didn't know that this was coming.
Yeah, they know exactly where every single Hamas fighter is within tunnels underground, yet they had no idea that the largest attack they've seen in decades was going to happen. And so now you have even the New York Times. This is Yahoo reposting the New York Times.
Because New York Times is a paywall, which is like ridiculous that you'd have to pay to read that shit.
I know.
Sorry.
But so now you have even the New York Times saying Israel knew Hamas's attack plan for more than a year. Israeli officials obtained Hamas's battle plan for October 7th more than a year before it happened. Documents, emails, and interviews show. But now I think this is where you get into the propaganda. Israeli military and intelligence dismissed it as aspirational and never thought it was going to be much. But do you really think when Israel's going in and like pre-October 7th, they would go into Gaza, they'd go into West Bank, and they'd murder people, they'd imprison, they'd already had 5,000 people imprisoned on nothing charges that they suspected of something or some bullshit like that. So do you really think they just allow Hamas to plan this type of thing, thinking it wasn't going to be anything? Or do you think they allowed Hamas to plan this type of thing because they knew this would serve as an in for them to achieve their ethnic cleansing aims? And to me, the second possibility is just far more likely. The 40-page document, which Israeli authorities codenamed Jericho Wall, had point by point how it was going to go down, and all of it ultimately held true. The translated document, which was reviewed by the New York Times, did not set a date for the attack, but described a methodical assault, et cetera, et cetera. The plan also included details about the location and size of Israeli military forces, communication hubs, sensitive information, raising questions about how Hamas gathered its intelligence and whether there were leaks from inside the Israeli security establishment. I think we're seeing more and more evidence coming out that Israel allowed this to happen because it serves their ends. And that's what your mainstream media can't tell you. And until this New York Times article, they weren't even saying that Israel knew in advance about any of this.
Well, right. And it's like, because if you look at corporate media, which I don't really recommend, but the question, anytime somebody's asked as like why they support rights for Palestinians or whatever, it's always like, well, what about October 7th? What about October 7th? So that's very convenient for Israel to have that, to use that to basically, it's kind of like the US used 9/11. Well, we're invading Iraq. But that had nothing. But 9/11, you're like, why are you yelled? That has nothing to do with and it would just like it would be used as a way to shut down any kind of conversation about the realities and the total injustice of the situation. And that's exactly what October 7th. I mean, just the fact that we talk about it, right? It's just October 7th. And I don't have to say the attacks that happened in Israel. You just know, right? It's become like that. It's already become that part of our zeitgeist, October 7th. So that is so convenient for Israel, because now instead of just going and carpet bombing Gaza, they can point to something. And so many people who want to just do like the both sidesing, or they're, they're scared of being called anti-Semitic, even though Palestinians are Semitic, and this is, just Google it. It's not that damn hard. But like they're like, oh, but October 7th. So that is so useful, and it's so sick and twisted, because this is a playbook that we've seen many times before as well.
Yeah, and I mean, when you put all this together, that the IDF was just indiscriminately bombing people. You have admissions from tank gunners saying they were told to fire on civilian structures, even though they knew there were civilians in there. And it's like, not only did Israel seemingly allow this to happen, have all the warnings this was happening and allow it to happen, but then when it actually happens, they do half the killing themselves.
Yeah. Well, and if you just look at like the evidence from the kibbutzes, or from the, people basically burned to a crisp in their cars, Hamas does not have that military technology. Right. Like they do not have Apache helicopters. Like if you just know, and I don't even know that much about military weaponry. Like I was the person, out organizing against the war. I know dick about military weaponry. And yet I'm looking at all of these military experts pointing out, okay, this can't do that, and that can't do this, and that's obvious. And I could look at this in 1 second, tell you that that's physically impossible to do with the weaponry that Hamas has. It's like, you don't have, I mean, this is just simple shit.
But to help get to the bottom of this, Israel has announced they will be shredding and burying all of the cars involved in the attack that still have blood and bullet holes, etc. They're all going to be shredded and buried, because that'll help us sort out.
I thought they said that because they were doing that because it's environmentally friendly.
They did. It's environmentally friendly.
No.
You think that's the real reason?
Oh, I feel like Israel's very greenly. I don't
very green. Very green.